Game over, Unia declared, her voice a quiet blade as she placed the final black go stone, sealing Flank's defeat in just 13 moves. The Manhattan Executive Lounge fell silent, Flank's jaw dropping as the CEO's confidence crumbled before Unia, the maid he'd mocked. Where are you watching from, folks? Drop a comment. London or Chicago South Side. What do you think happens next? Will Flank's arrogance spark change, or will Unia's hidden past as the whisperer of stones redefine the game? Stick around to uncover secrets that'll leave you stunned. If this moment grips you, hit that subscribe button to catch our latest stories and share where you're tuning in. Your support fuels our channel. Comment below with your predictions and let's unravel Unia's journey together. Don't miss the twist that changes everything. Subscribe now. The executive lounge on the 62nd floor of Pinnacle Enterprises' Manhattan headquarters gleamed like a jewel in the city's crown. Crystal flutes caught the amber glow of chandeliers, casting prisms across polished mahogany tables. The air buzzed with the low hum of privilege. Executives in tailored suits traded quips, their laughter sharp as the clink of ice in their drinks. At the room's heart stood a go board, its 19x19 grid, a silent sentinel, set out as a novelty for the quarterly gala. The game was a prop, a sophisticated nod to strategy, but tonight it would become a battlefield. Flank, the CEO, cut an imposing figure. His silver-flecked beard framed a face accustomed to command, his eyes glinting with the confidence of a man who'd never lost a deal or a game without choosing to. He leaned against a leather armchair, bourbon in hand, scanning the room for amusement. His gaze landed on Unia, the maid. She stood by a marble pillar, her long jet-black hair tied neatly back, her beauty a quiet rebellion against the plain navy uniform she wore. Her name tag, faded but legible, read Unia. She polished a silver tray with deliberate strokes, her movements fluid, almost meditative, as if the room's opulence couldn't touch her. Flank's lips curled into a smirk. "Come now," he called, his voice slicing through the chatter like a whip. "Let's have some fun. Unia, the maid, can play a round of Go. It'll be entertaining." The word dripped with mockery, and the room responded on cue. A vice president from finance raised an eyebrow, amused. A marketing director stifled a grin, her diamond earrings catching the light. Someone from HR chuckled into their champagne. The laughter was a chorus, a collective agreement that Unia, with her cleaning cart and faded tag, was merely a diversion. Unia's hands paused on the tray, her dark eyes lifting to meet Flank's. They were still, like a pond undisturbed by wind, holding a depth that made the room's laughter falter for a fleeting moment. No one knew her secret. Unia, born on Chicago's South Side, had once been a Go prodigy, dubbed the Whisperer of Stones at 14 for her uncanny ability to weave patterns that left opponents breathless. She'd played in smoke-filled community centers, outmaneuvering grizzled veterans before her mother's cancer, her brother's incarceration, and a vanished scholarship forced her to trade the board for a mop. Now she cleaned while CEOs toasted to innovation. Flank gestured to the Go board, his grin widening. "Step up, Unia. Show us what you've got." The room tittered, a few executives leaning forward, eager for the spectacle. Unia set the tray down with a soft clink, her movements unhurried, almost ceremonial. She approached the board, her sneakers silent on the marble floor, and stood before it, surveying the grid with a quiet familiarity. "I'll take black," she said, her voice soft but clear, like a bell cutting through fog. Flank blinked, his amusement tinged with surprise. "Black? Bold choice." Black moved second in Go, a subtle disadvantage. But Unia's choice carried a weight he couldn't yet grasp. She didn't respond, her fingers selecting a black stone from the bowl with a precision that felt like muscle memory. The room watched, some smirking, others curious as she arranged her side of the board. Flank sat opposite, his posture casual, his bourbon still in hand. "Let's make this quick," he muttered, placing his first white stone with a practiced snap. The game began, and Flank's opening was sharp, a Fuseki honed in Ivy League retreats and charity tournaments. His stones claimed territory with aggressive confidence, each placement a declaration of dominance. Unia responded with a quiet rhythm, her black stones forming subtle patterns. Unremarkable at first, like ripples on water. But ripples can become waves. 5 moves in, Flank's brow furrowed, his fingers hesitating over the bowl. The room's chatter softened, replaced by the faint clack of stones. By move 9, a marketing exec shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing something amiss. Unia's stones moved with surgical elegance, cutting Flank's groups, encircling his territory with a patience that felt inevitable. At move 12, Flank leaned forward, his bourbon forgotten, his jaw tight. The room was nearly silent now, the clink of glasses replaced by held breaths. Unia's eyes never left the board, her face a mask of calm. She lifted a final black stone, her fingers steady, and placed it with a soft click. The grid shifted, her pattern complete, a trap so precise it left no escape. "Game over," she said, her voice unchanged, as if she'd merely finished a chore. Flank's face reddened, his breath catching. In a flash of rage, he swept the board with his arm, sending black and white stones clattering across the marble floor like scattered dreams. The room froze, a collective gasp swallowed by shock. Unia stood unruffled and pushed her cleaning cart toward the elevator. "Thank you for the game, Mr. Flank," she said, her tone even, her back straight. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and the lounge was silent, the hum of the ventilation system louder than the stunned executives. Flank stared at the scattered stones, his chest tight with a storm of humiliation and something deeper. A crack in the armor of his arrogance, a whisper of respect for the woman who'd just undone him. The city pulsed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Flank's Tribeca penthouse, its lights flickering like a restless heartbeat. Inside, the minimalist fortress of glass and steel felt stifling, the air heavy with the echo of scattered ghost stones. Flank sat on a sleek leather sofa, his bourbon untouched on the obsidian coffee table, the memory of Unia's victory burning through his mind like a fever. Her final black stone, placed with that soft click, had not just ended the game, it had fractured something deeper, a certainty he'd carried like a shield. The maid, with her faded name tag and steady gaze, had dismantled him in 13 moves, and the humiliation was only half the wound. The other half was a question. Who was she? Sleep was a stranger that night. Flank's bedroom, with its pristine white linens and curated art, offered no refuge. By 1 a.m., he was pacing, his bare feet cold against the hardwood. The image of Unia's eyes, still, unyielding, like a lake hiding a storm, haunted him. She wasn't just a cleaner, her play was a language, precise and profound, born of a past he'd mocked without knowing. At 2 a.m., he surrendered to obsession, dragging his laptop to the kitchen counter. The screen's glow cast harsh shadows across his face as he typed Unia Go Player Chicago into the search bar, his fingers striking the keys with a desperation he didn't recognize. The results were a cacophony of noise. LinkedIn profiles for other Unias, social media accounts that didn't match her face, blog posts about unrelated tournaments. He scrolled deeper, past ads and dead links, until a grainy photo from a 2008 Southside Go tournament froze his breath. A teenage girl stood beside a board, her braid tucked behind one ear, her gaze poised, unmistakable. The caption read, UJ Rising Star. No last name, no further records, as if she'd vanished from the game's history. But Flank knew it was her, the way she'd held the stone, the way her patterns unfolded like a poem. Those weren't the moves of a hobbyist. They were the work of someone who'd once been formidable, disciplined, a whisperer of stones. He leaned back, rubbing his temples, the laptop's hum the only sound in the cavernous penthouse. Why had she stopped? What buried that talent under a maid's uniform? The questions gnawed at him, not just about her, but about himself. Flank had built an empire on control, data, deals, perceptions. But Unia had seen through him, her stones exposing every overconfident placement, every assumption. For the first time, he felt like the piece, not the player, and the realization was a splinter under his skin. Across the city, in a cramped Harlem apartment, Unia sat on the edge of her bed. the springs creaking under her weight. The room was small, cluttered with secondhand furniture, and the faint scent of lavender from a candle she'd lit to calm her nerves. Her navy uniform hung on a chair, its faded name tag catching the dim light. She untied her long, jet-black hair, letting it fall like a curtain, her fingers trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from the rush of the game. The board, the stones, the rhythm of play had stirred something she'd buried years ago, a spark she'd thought extinguished by life's relentless demands. Unia's mind drifted to the south side, to the community center where her father, a bus driver with calloused hands, had taught her go on a warped wooden board. She'd been 14, a prodigy dubbed the Whisperer of Stones for her ability to read opponents' souls through their moves. She'd outplayed men twice her age, their gruff laughter turning to silence as her patterns closed around them. But then came her mother's cancer, her brother's arrest, the scholarship that dissolved when she missed too many classes to work. The Go board was boxed away, replaced by mops and time cards. Survival didn't leave room for dreams. Tonight, though, the game had called her back. Flank's mockery, the room's laughter, had been a gauntlet, and she'd picked it up without hesitation. Placing that final stone, hearing the room's breath catch, had felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Yet it also felt fragile, like a spark in a storm. Would this moment change anything? Or was it just a fleeting defiance against a world that saw her as invisible? She stood crossing to a small mirror on the wall, her reflection sharp in the candlelight. Her eyes, the same ones that had unnerved Flank, held a question. Could she still belong to the board? Or was she just a shadow playing someone else's game? In his penthouse, Flank closed the laptop, the photo of young Unia etched in his mind. He stared out at the city, its skyline a testament to his power. Yet it felt hollow. Unia's victory wasn't just a loss, it was a mirror, reflecting every assumption he'd never questioned. He didn't know her story, but he knew it was vast, and for the first time, he wanted to understand, not to win, but to learn. Unia, in her Harlem apartment, blew out the candle, the darkness settling around her. The spark of the game lingered in her chest, fragile but alive, and she wondered if it was enough to light her way forward, or if it would fade like so many dreams before. The executive lounge on the 62nd floor of Pinnacle Enterprises' Manhattan headquarters was a different beast after hours. The chandeliers dimmed to a soft gold, casting long shadows across the marble floors, and the air, free of champagne and laughter, held a quiet that felt almost sacred. The Go board stood at the room's center, its grid reset, black and white stones waiting in their bowls like soldiers before a battle. Flank stood by a window, his silhouette sharp against the city's glittering skyline, his silver-flecked beard catching the faint light. His hands were clasped behind his back, a posture less of confidence than of resolve. He'd been here since the last executive left, waiting, the memory of Unia's victory a weight he couldn't shake. Her final stone, her calm game over, had left a crack in his world, and tonight he sought not to mend it, but to face it. The soft squeak of a cleaning cart broke the silence. Unia entered, her long jet-black hair tied neatly back, her navy uniform crisp despite the late hour. Her beauty, even in the utilitarian outfit, was striking, a quiet defiance of the room's opulence. She paused at the threshold, her dark eyes locking onto Flank's, unreadable but steady, like a lake reflecting a storm. The cart, laden with cleaning supplies, seemed an extension of her, a shield against the world that had mocked her 2 days ago. Flank turned, his throat tight, and stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking on the marble. Unia, he said, his voice lower than intended, stripped of the bravado that had once filled this room. I owe you an apology. I was wrong to mock you, to treat you like entertainment. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded, a confession from a man unused to admitting fault. Unia's expression didn't shift. She set her mop against the cart, her movements deliberate, and crossed her arms. Why? She asked, her voice soft but edged, like a blade wrapped in silk. Why apologize now? Flank hesitated, his fingers twitching as if reaching for an answer he didn't fully grasp. Because I need to understand how you did that, he said finally, gesturing to the Go board. Your game, it wasn't luck. It was Something else. Unia's eyes narrowed, searching his face for motive. The room felt smaller, the space between them charged with an unspoken challenge. One game, she said at last, her tone flat but firm. Just us. Flank nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face, and moved to the board, pulling out a chair. Unia approached, her sneakers silent, and sat opposite him, taking the black stones as before. The board was a battlefield, but tonight the stakes were different. No audience, no laughter, just two players and the truth of their moves. Flank placed his first white stone with a careful snap, his opening cautious, a departure from his earlier aggression. Unia responded, her black stone settling with a soft click, her pattern subtle, probing. As the grid filled, Flank spoke, his voice tentative. Where did you learn to play like that? Unia's fingers paused over the bowl, a black stone between them. My father, she said, her voice low like a door creaking open. He was a bus driver, played Go at a South Side community center with men who smelled of diesel and sweat. I watched, then I played. She placed her stone, her eyes on the board. I was good. Good enough for tournaments, good enough to dream. Then life happened. Flank leaned forward, his next move slower. What happened? He asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Unia's gaze flicked to his, sharp and guarded. My mother got sick, cancer. My brother got locked up. The scholarship I had for school vanished when I missed too many classes to work. Go doesn't pay hospital bills. Her words were spare, each one a stone placed with precision, revealing just enough. Flank swallowed, his throat dry, and placed a white stone, but his focus wavered. Unia's pattern was tightening, her stones encircling his with a patience that felt like a tide rising. You stopped playing, he said, more statement than question. I stopped dreaming, she corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. The board was nearly full now, their moves a quiet dance, each stone a word in a conversation neither fully understood. Flank's position was solid but strained, Unia's fluid but restrained. She could have pressed, could have crushed him as before, but her next move was soft, offering balance rather than victory. The game ended in a draw, the board a testament to mutual restraint. Flank stared at the grid, his breath shallow. You held back, he said, his tone caught between awe and frustration. Unia stood, smoothing her uniform. You're not ready for more, she said, her eyes meeting his for a moment, a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or challenge. She moved to her cart, gripping the handle. I have floors to clean. Flank rose, his chair scraping softly. Unia, he called as she reached the elevator. She paused, not turning. Thank you, he said, the words heavy with a sincerity he hadn't known he possessed. The doors opened, and she stepped inside, her silhouette framed by the light. As they closed, Flank stood alone, the board between them no longer a game, but a mirror, reflecting a man who'd glimpsed his own limits, and a woman who'd reminded him what strength looked like. The Harlem Rec Center was a world apart from Pinnacle Enterprises' gleaming towers, its cracked linoleum floors and peeling paint, a testament to resilience over luxury. The air carried the tang of sweat and old wood, mingling with the laughter of children who darted between folding tables. At the room's heart, Unia knelt beside a wobbly table, her long jet-black hair tied back, her navy uniform traded for a simple gray sweatshirt. She guided a boy no older than 10 through a go-ladder tactic, her voice soft but firm, like a current steering a ship. See the escape? Cut here, she said, pointing to the board's grid. The boy's eyes widened, his small fingers placing a black stone with newfound confidence. Unia's smile was brief but warm, a spark of pride that lit the dim room. Flank stood in the doorway, his tailored coat out of place among the scuffed walls and flickering fluorescence. He'd driven himself, no chauffeur, no agenda, drawn by a pull he couldn't name. The image of Unia's restrained draw in their last game lingered. Her words, "You're not ready for more," a challenge he was still unraveling. He watched her now, not as the maid who'd humbled him, but as a teacher, her patience a kind of alchemy that turned hesitant kids into tacticians. She hadn't seen him yet, and for a moment, Flank felt like an intruder. His presence a disruption in this sanctuary of focus and hope. Unia rose, brushing dust from her knees, and caught his gaze. Her expression hardened, the warmth she'd shown the boy replaced by a guarded stillness. "Mr. Flank," she said, her voice low, crossing her arms, "what brings you here?" The children glanced up, curious, but Unia's tone kept them at their boards. Flank stepped forward, his hands in his pockets, trying to soften the weight of his presence. "I asked around," he said, his voice quieter than in the executive lounge. "They said you coach here. I wanted to see it for myself." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "See what? Me or your conscience?" The words were sharp, but Flank didn't flinch. He pulled a folded flyer from his coat, its edges worn from his grip, and held it out. "The New York Open Go tournament," he said. "You belong there, Unia. Your game. It's not meant for cleaning carts and empty lounges." The flyer hung between them, a fragile bridge. Unia didn't take it immediately, her gaze flicking from the paper to his face, searching for pity or agenda. "I'm not your project," she said, her voice a blade wrapped in calm. Flank lowered his hand but didn't retreat. "This isn't about me," he said, though the words felt half true. "It's about what you could do, who you could be again." Unia's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the rec center's noise, kids' chatter, the clack of stones, faded, leaving only the tension between them. She took the flyer, her fingers brushing the paper's edge, and tucked it into her pocket. "I'll think about it," she said, her tone final, turning back to the boy at the table. Flank lingered, watching her resume her lesson, then left, the flyer's absence in his hand a small victory, fragile but real. Back at Pinnacle, the air was different, charged with whispers that slithered through cubicles and boardrooms. "Flank's mentoring the Maid," a junior exec muttered over coffee in the cafeteria, his tone laced with skepticism. "Looks bad for optics." Another from marketing smirked. "What's he playing at? Charity or something else?" The words reached Unia like a slow poison, carried by sidelong glances in hallways, conversations that hushed when she pushed her cart into a room. Her beauty, once invisible, now drew scrutiny, her presence a puzzle the corporate machine couldn't solve. The tension peaked when HR summoned her to a sterile office on the 10th floor, its white walls and plastic chairs a stark contrast to the lounge's opulence. A woman in a gray suit, her smile as thin as her clipboard, leaned forward. "Unia, we need to ensure professionalism," she said, her voice syrupy with caution. "Your interactions with Mr. Flank have raised questions." Unia sat straight, her hands folded, her eyes unyielding. "I clean floors," she said, her voice steady. "I play Go when asked. That's all." The woman's smile tightened, her pen tapping the clipboard. "You understand how this appears, don't you? Perceptions matter." Unia's fingers twitched, the flyer in her pocket a silent weight. "I understand," she said, her tone cool, "that perceptions are a luxury for those with titles." The woman blinked, caught off guard, but Unia stood, smoothing her uniform. "Am I being disciplined?" she asked, her voice daring the answer. "No," the woman said quickly, as if retreating. "Just be mindful." Unia nodded, leaving the office, the door's soft click louder than any reprimand. The scrutiny stung, sharp as glass underfoot, but it also kindled something, a resolve to reclaim her place, not for Flank, not for Pinnacle, but for the girl who'd once whispered to stones. As she pushed her cart through the silent halls, the flyer burned in her pocket, a spark of recognition that refused to fade. The corridors of Pinnacle Enterprises' Manhattan headquarters were a labyrinth of glass and ambition, but for Unia they had become a gauntlet. Each push of her cleaning cart drew eyes, sly glances from executives, hushed murmurs that trailed her like shadows. The whispers had grown teeth since her games with Flank, no longer confined to cafeteria gossip, but woven into the corporate fabric. "Flank's pet project," a finance manager hissed in an elevator. Unaware, Unia stood in the corner, her long, jet-black hair tied back, her navy uniform a silent rebuke to their judgment. "She's playing him. Mark my word," another muttered over a conference call, the words drifting through an open door as Unia mopped a hallway. Her beauty, once invisible, now marked her as an anomaly, a maid who dared to sit at the CEO's board. The scrutiny was a slow poison, seeping into her routine. Unia felt it in the way conversations stopped when she entered break rooms, in the lingering stares of security guards who once nodded without a second thought. The corporate machine, with its polished smiles and unwritten rules, didn't tolerate outliers. And Unia, with her quiet victories, had become one. The weight of it pressed against her chest, a familiar ache from years of being unseen, now twisted into being too seen. Not as a player, but as a story spun by others. Yet she pushed her cart, her hands steady, her dark eyes unyielding, refusing to bend. The tension crystallized one afternoon when Unia found a note slipped in her locker, its edges sharp against her fingers. 3 words scrawled in block letters. Know your place? She stared at it, her pulse quickening, not with fear but with a simmering anger, the kind that coils tight and waits. She crumpled the paper slowly, her knuckles whitening, and tossed it into a trash bin. But its message lingered, a splinter in her resolve. Who had left it? An exec protecting the status quo? A colleague resentful of her sudden visibility? The anonymity made it heavier, a faceless judgment from a world that preferred her invisible. That evening, Unia arrived at the Harlem Rec Center, her sanctuary, only to find it transformed. New Go boards gleamed on the tables, their grids crisp, the stones polished and uniform. A stack of tutoring manuals sat in a corner, and a volunteer beamed, "Anonymous donor, came through this morning." Unia's stomach twisted. She knew without proof that Flank was behind it. The grant was generous. New equipment, transportation for kids, even stipends for coaches. But it felt like a string, a tether to the man who'd started this storm. "This you?" she asked Flank the next night, cornering him in the executive lounge, her voice low but sharp. Flank, standing by the go board, shook his head, his silver-flecked beard catching the dim light. "Not directly," he said, his eyes meeting hers, steady but guarded. Unia's jaw tightened, her pocket heavy with the tournament flyer she still hadn't discarded. "Don't lie to me," she said, her tone daring him to deflect. He raised his hands, palms open. "I didn't sign the check, Unia, but I won't pretend I don't know who did." The admission hung between them, a fragile thread. She turned away, gripping her cart, unwilling to let gratitude blur her suspicion. The whispers at Pinnacle grew louder, a chorus of doubt that followed her like a shadow. Unia was called into HR again, the same sterile office, the same woman in a gray suit, her clipboard a shield. "We've had concerns," the woman said, her voice syrupy with false warmth. "Your relationship with Mr. Flank, it's raising questions about favoritism." Unia sat straight, her hands folded, her eyes like flint. "I clean floors," she said, each word deliberate. "I play Go when he asks. No money, no favors, just stones." The woman's smile faltered, her pen tapping nervously. "Appearances matter, Unia. You're in a delicate position." Unia leaned forward, her voice low. "Delicate for who? Me, or the people who can't stand me sitting at his table?" The silence was electric, the woman's composure cracking. Unia stood, smoothing her uniform. "I have work to do," she said, leaving the door's soft click as her only retort. That night, in the executive lounge, Unia found a note under the go board, Flank's handwriting neat but urgent. "I'll stay out of sight for a while, but I'm still playing, 1 move a night." A single white stone sat on the grid, a bold opening. Unia stared at it, her anger warring with resolve. She placed a black stone, her counter precise, and left no note, only her move, a silent defiance. For days they traded stones without words, each placement a conversation, a bridge across the divide of power and perception. The game was intimate, a refuge from the whispers, and with each move, Unia's resolve hardened. She'd play the New York Open, not for Flank's redemption, but to reclaim her voice, to prove the stones still listened to her whispers. As she pushed her cart into the elevator, the board behind her held their silent dialogue, a testament to a game that was no longer about winning, but about understanding. The New York Open Go tournament hummed with a quiet ferocity, its energy crackling in the air of a renovated hotel ballroom in downtown Manhattan. Rows of folding tables stretched across the faded carpet, each topped with regulation go boards. Their 19x19 grids a battlefield for grandmasters in sharp suits, teenage prodigies hunched over tablets, and hobbyists adjusting their glasses. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the players, but Unia stood at the entrance, her navy blouse and polished slacks a far cry from her maid's uniform. Her long, jet-black hair was tied back, her player badge clutched like a talisman. She didn't fit among the competitors, yet the board called to her, its lines whispering memories of the girl once dubbed the Whisperer of Stones. Unia's first match was against a middle-aged club player from Brooklyn, his condescending smile a mirror of Flank's initial mockery. He opened with a loose fuseki, underestimating her, chatting idly about the weather. Unia's black stones answered with ruthless precision, cutting his groups in 25 moves, her victory swift and silent. The man's smile vanished, his handshake curt. Her second match was fiercer, a young woman with a rapid, aggressive style, her white stones darting like knives. Unia slowed the tempo, her patterns patient, breaking the attack with a single, devastating Atari. The woman's clock bled out, and Unia signed the score sheet, her face unreadable, though her pulse raced with a fire she hadn't felt in years. The whispers followed her, a low hum beneath the clack of stones. Between rounds, Unia passed a refreshment table where spectators murmured, their voices sharp with speculation. "That's the maid from Pinnacle, right?" one said, sipping coffee. "Flank's backing her. Classic PR move," another replied, smirking. Unia kept walking, her sneakers silent on the carpet, the words of familiar sting. She was used to being erased, but now they were rewriting her, casting her as Flank's creation rather than her own. The flyer in her pocket, now creased from handling, burned against her thigh, a reminder that she played for herself, not their narratives. From across the room, Flank watched, uncharacteristically understated in a gray hoodie and jeans, blending into the crowd. He'd entered the tournament too, his name just another on the roster, but his eyes rarely left Unia. He nodded once when she glanced his way, a gesture of acknowledgement, not ownership. Unia nodded back, the exchange brief but heavy, a silent pact forged in their late-night stone exchanges. Flank's own matches were uneven, a win against a local veteran, a loss to a precise college student, but he wasn't here for trophies. He was here for clarity, for the woman who'd shifted his world with a single game. The semi-final was Unia's crucible. Her opponent, a tall man in a tailored suit, looked like he'd stepped from a boardroom, his smile cold, his handshake firm. "Ready, Miss Unia?" he asked, his tone patronizing. She met his gaze, her eyes like flint. "I've been ready." The clock started, and Unia took black, her stones moving with a rhythm that was both fierce and serene. She played not to prove, not to silence, but to breathe, each placement a reclaiming of the girl who'd once dreamed on Chicago's South Side. The man opened aggressively, his white stones claiming vast territory, but Unia sacrificed early, drawing him into a trap he thought he controlled. The room faded, the murmurs, the ticking clocks, the shifting crowd. There was only the board, its grid a universe where Unia was neither maid nor symbol, but a force. Her stones wove a pattern of devastating elegance, her Atari on move 47 slicing through his defenses like a blade. He leaned back, his smile gone, and after a long pause, tipped his bowl, conceding. The crowd erupted, a roar that shook the ballroom's stale air. Unia stood, her hands steady, and accepted the crystal plaque, its weight unfamiliar but earned. The applause was thunder, but her eyes sought Flank. He stood at the room's edge, clapping louder than the rest, his grin wider than she'd ever seen, a stranger's enthusiasm that honored their pact. Unia nodded, a flicker of understanding passing between them, a bridge built on stones and silences. After the match, she slipped into the hotel lobby, needing air, the plaque heavy in her bag. Flank found her leaning against a column, his presence quiet, unintrusive. "You looked unstoppable," he said, his voice soft. Unia exhaled, her shoulders tense. "They're calling me your story, not a player." Flank's jaw tightened, but his tone was steady. Play like they don't exist, Unia. She met his gaze, her eyes burning with a fire that wasn't anger, but resolve. I intend to, she said, her voice a vow. They stood in silence, the lobby's hum a distant echo. You'll clap, right? She asked, half teasing, half serious. Like a stranger, he replied, his smile genuine. Loud enough to make a fool of myself. Unia's lips twitched, a rare hint of warmth, and she turned away, the plaque a silent promise. The tournament wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration, a step toward a self she'd buried, and as she walked into the night, the board's whispers followed, urging her forward. The auditorium of the Harlem Community Center pulsed with a vibrant energy, its worn wooden stage a stark contrast to the gleaming ballrooms Unia once cleaned. The ceiling tiles were yellowed, the stage lights flickered with age, but the rows of folding chairs brimmed with families, coaches, and city officials, their faces alight with pride. Unia stood at the stage's edge, adjusting the collar of her navy blazer, a far cry from the faded uniform that once defined her. Her long jet-black hair was tied back, her polished shoes gleaming under the lights. Her name tag, now reading Unia, Director, Harlem Youth Go Initiative, felt like armor, a testament to a journey from mop to mission. The citywide invitational had just ended, and her students, children from Harlem's toughest corners, clutched bronze medals, their laughter a melody that drowned out the ghosts of corporate whispers. The stage was set for the closing ceremony, but Unia's stomach knotted as she scanned the crowd. Her students' faces beaming, passed their medals like treasures, their chatter a reminder of why she'd fought to be here. One girl, a lanky 9-year-old named Aisha, waved a score sheet shouting, Coach Unia, I pinned his knight. Unia's smile was brief but genuine, a spark of joy amid her nerves. She'd taken the director role weeks ago, a position that came with a modest office, a paycheck that didn't vanish into hospital bills, and expectations heavier than any go board. The weight of those expectations, to inspire, to uplift, to prove her victory wasn't a fluke, pressed against her, but she carried it with reverence. The MC, a wiry man with a booming voice, took the microphone. Before we close, let's honor the woman who made this possible, Unia. The spotlight swung to her, and Unia's breath caught. She hadn't wanted this, the glare of recognition, but the applause was real. Not the polite claps of Pinnacle's elite, but a roar from parents, kids, and volunteers who'd stacked chairs and poured juice boxes. From the back, Flank stood, his gray sweater unassuming, clapping slow and steady, his eyes meeting hers with a nod that carried no claim, only respect. Unia stepped to the podium, the microphone too tall, her hands adjusting it with a steadiness that belied her racing heart. I didn't come here to be seen, she began, her voice clear, cutting through the room's hum. I came because I believed if one kid could see they were more than their neighborhood, their struggles, their past, that'd be enough. But you, she paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. You've shown me I aim too small. You don't just want to believe, you want to build. The room quieted, some nodding, a few wiping tears. The beauty of Go, she continued, is that even the smallest stone can shift the board if it's brave enough to move. The applause erupted, thunderous, a wave that carried her forward. Backstage, Unia slipped behind the curtains, needing a moment to fold the noise into something she could carry. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust, a grounding contrast to the crowd's fervor. Flank was there, leaning against a stack of props, 2 coffee cups in hand, steam curling from their lids. Figured you'd skip the champagne, he said, offering one. Unia took it, blowing gently on the lid, her murmur soft. You figured right. They sat on a stairwell, the auditorium's hum muffled by the curtain, a fragile bubble of quiet. You did it, Flank said, his voice low, stripped of the CEO's polish. You changed the board. Unia's eyes flicked to his, searching for motive, but found only sincerity. Then why do I feel like I'm still a piece in someone else's game? She asked, her voice raw. Flank leaned back, his cup cradled in his hands. Because the world's slow to catch up, but you're not waiting anymore. Unia sipped her coffee, the bitterness grounding her. What's next? He asked, his tone open, not pressing. More kids, more boards, more mornings where someone wins when they thought they couldn't, she said, her voice steadying. And you? Flank's smile was faint, almost self-deprecating. Learning to play without needing to win. Unia's lips twitched, a rare warmth breaking through. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden box, its surface smooth from age. For you, he said, handing it over. Unia frowned, wary of gifts, but opened it. Inside was a single ghost stone, black, carved from polished ebony, its base engraved. Every move you made mattered. She stared at it, her throat tight, the stone a weight that felt like truth. I'm not used to keepsakes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You should be, Flank replied, his tone quiet but firm. You're worth remembering. Unia closed the box, the soft click final, a seal on a moment she hadn't expected. Thank you, she said, the words heavy with meaning. They stood, the stairwell's dim light casting their shadows long and intertwined. As they parted, Unia glanced back. You're still terrible at defensive patterns, she said, a teasing edge to her voice. Flank grinned, unoffended. Guess I need more practice. Unia turned, the box in her pocket a new anchor. In her apartment that night, she placed the black stone beside a single pawn from her old board. 2 pieces, one beginning, one becoming. The city hummed outside, oblivious but alive, and Unia, no longer a shadow, stood ready for the next move, her legacy etched not in crystal, but in the hearts of those she taught to play. What did Unia's journey spark in you? Did her courage to reclaim her place on the board inspire you to rethink your own moves in life? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Where are you watching from, and what moment hit you hardest? Your voice keeps this story alive. A huge thank you for joining us on this ride through triumph and transformation. If Unia and Flank's story moved you, hit that subscribe button to catch our next tale of resilience and redemption. Like, comment, and share to spread the spark. We can't wait to meet you again in the next story. Until then, keep playing your own game, one bold move at a time.